Emily was a young administrative assistant working in an old building in the city center. That night, her work had stretched longer than usual, and she was the last to leave. The hallways were deserted, and the sound of rain hitting the windows echoed. Through the building, it was almost midnight, and Emily felt the weight of exhaustion in each step as she walked toward the elevator, pressing the down button. She glanced at her phone. No notifications, no calls, just the screen glowing in an uncomfortable silence. The elevator arrived with a metallic, dragging sound, as if it were complaining about being used. When the doors opened, it revealed a worn interior with dim lights and scratched metal walls. Emily hesitated, feeling an inexplicable chill, but she entered. She pressed the button for the ground floor, eager to get home. However, as the doors closed, the elevator shook and the lights began to flicker. The control panel seemed to malfunction, with the floor numbers alternating randomly. Emily furrowed her brow and pressed the ground floor button again, but nothing happened. Suddenly, she felt a slight change in the air. It was as if the space had become colder, heavier. She looked at her reflection in the elevator mirror, and for a brief moment, she saw something strange. A shadow appeared behind her. Her heart raced, but when she turned, the elevator was empty. The silence was so intense that she could hear her own breath. "I must be imagining things," she thought, trying to convince herself it was just the fatigue. The elevator finally started to descend, but in an irregular manner. Trembling as if struggling against some invisible weight, Emily held onto the handrail to steady herself while the floor numbers continued to flicker erratically with every second. Her discomfort grew. She pressed the emergency button, but there was no response. She tried using her phone, but, as expected, there was no signal. The lights flickered faster and faster, casting strange shadows on the walls. Emily's breathing quickened as she looked around, trying to find any logical explanation for what was happening. Then, without warning, the elevator stopped abruptly, throwing Emily against the wall. The lights went out completely, plunging her into absolute darkness. A terrifying silence took over the space until a low, guttural sound echoed throughout. Emily froze. "This isn't real. This isn't real," she repeated to herself, but the sound grew louder. It was like a whisper, hoarse and distorted, speaking incomprehensible words. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the corner of the elevator stood a monstrous figure. It was tall, with disproportionate arms, gray skin, and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through. Her Emily screamed, pressing herself against the opposite wall, while the creature merely stared at her with a distorted grin. Emily tried to manually open the door, but the metal seemed stuck, as if the elevator were a living prison. The creature stepped forward, and the sound of its claws scraping the floor echoed throughout the space. "You came to the wrong place." The creature's deep voice reverberated through the elevator as if speaking directly inside her mind. Suddenly, the elevator began to descend again, but now at an absurd speed. Emily clung to the handrail, her body trembling as the lights continued to flicker. The metal walls began to warp, showing terrifying images. Figures being chased, shadows devouring human shapes, and glowing eyes watching Emily from every angle. She shut her eyes, trying to block it out, but the images seemed to be burned into her mind. When the elevator finally stopped, Emily fell to the floor, exhausted and shaking. The doors opened slowly, revealing a corridor that didn't seem to belong to reality. The walls were covered in a viscous substance that pulsated as if alive. A nauseating smell of decay filled the air. In the distance, there was a faint light, and something seemed to be moving in the shadows. The creature behind her pointed toward the corridor, as if commanding her to leave. With no choice, Emily took a hesitant step out. When she looked back, the elevator doors quickly shut, and the metallic sound echoed like a final warning. She began walking, but the corridor seemed endless. Each step was accompanied by whispers, growls, and the sound of something crawling behind her. The further Emily walked, the more the corridor seemed to close around her, as if it were alive. The walls pulsated, and the light at the end seemed to move farther away. The whispers grew louder, and figures began to emerge from the walls, their faces distorted and filled with pain. She ran, but the corridor appeared to have no end. Suddenly, the shadows began to take form, becoming creatures like the one in the elevator. They surrounded her, blocking every path. Emily fell to her knees, crying and begging for her life. The original creature appeared in front of her, now much larger and more grotesque, with sharp teeth and eyes glowing intensely. It whispered in a mocking tone, "Welcome to your new home." The final scene shows the elevator returning to the ground floor, empty and silent. The doors open, and another person steps inside, restarting the cycle of the nightmare. If this story gave you chills, imagine what else we have in store for you. Subscribe to the channel and uncover the darkest secrets.